Today's video we'll discuss bullet selection. I was at a gun show about 3 weeks ago and standing at a vendor's table looking at some gunpowder. The vendor sold reloading supplies, and he asked the guy next to me what he was looking for. The guy said, "I need some bullets." The vendor said, "Well, what are you loading?" He said, "223 Remington." Vendor goes, "Oh, I've got these on sale right here. It's best bullet I sell for 223. I've got them on a show special for, I don't forget what it was, $10 or $15 off." The guy said, "Great, I'll take 2 boxes." He didn't even look at the box. Uh, so the vendor, to be honest, looked a little surprised too, but and I was tempted to intervene and say something, but for all I knew, these two guys knew each other, and the vendor already knew what kind of gun the guy had and what kind of shooting he does. Or the guy could have been there earlier in the day and had already looked at those bullets and knew what they were. So I kept my mouth shut. But it kind of put me in mind that maybe a video on bullet selection might be in order. There's a lot more to it than just the diameter of the bullet. Getting a bullet in the right caliber, of course, is the first consideration, but there's a lot more to it. I mean, what firearm are you going to be shooting it in? What kind of barrel do you have? What are you going to be shooting? Are you doing target shooting, long range shooting, short range? Are you going to go hunting? You know, what kind of animal are you looking for to hunt? So there's quite a bit more to bullet selection than just the diameter of the bullet. So that's what we'll talk about in this video. Now, before we start talking about bullet selection, let's just review a little bit about bullet composition and the different kinds of bullets that there are out there. Now, I'm not going to bother with lead ball and conical bullets in the muzzle loading world and the flintlocks and all of that. Let's talk more about about modern bullets. Now, of course, the basic bullet is lead. The advantage of a lead bullet is, number one, they're very inexpensive. You can make them yourself for very small initial outlay of money for the equipment. You just need a lead pot to melt the lead, some molds, and basically a sizing and lubricating device of some sort. And you can make your own lead bullets. I made these myself, and very easy to do, very inexpensive. Now, the downside with lead is that they tend to foul your bore really bad. You get lead fouling, it kind of jams down into the grooves on the rifling, and it's difficult to clean. You have to clean your bore out with a brush. You need to make sure that you have a special cleaning agent that is able to clean lead, that sort of thing. Now, lead bullets also are used primarily in low velocity applications, mostly in handgun applications where you're talking about velocities of under 1,000 feet per second, that kind of thing. If you start firing lead bullets out at a very high rate of speed, you're going to get a lot of fouling. You're going to get a loss of accuracy. The more lead that builds up in your barrel, the less accurate your firearm will be. So there's a downside to using lead bullets. And like I said, you mostly see them in pistol. Now, 22 long rifle, which are relatively low velocity bullets, are still made of lead. So if you have a 22 rifle, it shoots 22 long rifle, you want to make sure you get in there and clean that bore out real well. Now, the other end of the spectrum is the jacketed bullet. Now, the jacketed bullets were basically invented to reduce the amount of lead fouling in the bore. Essentially, it's a lead core inside there with a copper jacket on it, hence the term jacketed bullets. They you get a little bit of copper fouling in your bore, but it's not nearly to the extent that you would get lead fouling. So there are also cleaning agents for your bore that will handle copper fouling as well. So and some claim that to do both. So it's a lot easier to clean your bore, and your bore stays a lot cleaner with jacketed bullets, and that's really kind of the reason that they exist. Now, you've all probably heard the term full metal jacket, and that's really kind of a misnomer. Because if you'll notice here, of course, the nose and the sides of the bullet are completely encased in copper. It's not pure copper. It's about 5 or 10% zinc or something like that in there, but it's encased in copper. But if you look at the bottom, you'll see, see if I can get that in focus. You'll see that the bottom of the bullet is open, and you can see the lead core in there. So even though it's called a full metal jacket, it's not actually a full metal jacket. Now they do have total metal jacket, TMJ. Typically you see FMJ for full metal jacket, and TMJ for a total metal jacket. And this, you can see the backside of it is encased just like the front. So it's entirely encased in copper. So this is a total metal jacket bullet. Now, full metal jacket bullets are made by first creating the jacket. They'll create this cup, basically, and then they'll pour lead into that, and the lead forms, of course, to the inside of the cup, and that's basically how they're made. The jacket itself kind of acts as a mold. Now there are also a step kind of in between the lead bullet and the jacketed bullet, and that's the plated bullet. Now, plated bullets are made a little bit differently. With a plated bullet, what they'll do first is they'll create the lead core. Typically, they'll make a kind of a rope out of lead, a lead rope, and then they'll swage the bullet from that lead rope, and they'll get this copper core. And then they'll put that into a copper bath, and it's very similar to chrome plating metal parts. It's the same kind of reaction between the copper and the lead core. And what happens then, of course, is the lead core gets plated with copper. Now, the plated bullets have a much thinner coating of copper on them. So you really can't use them in high velocity applications like you would, say like with a 308 or something like that, where you're shooting, 2,000 to 3,000 feet per second or more. So typically with plated bullets, you'll see them in applications where the velocities are under 1,300 feet per second or thereabouts. Different manufacturers have different velocity recommendations for their plated bullets. So on one end of the spectrum you've got lead. On the other end of the spectrum you've got the full metal jacket, and then somewhere in between there is the plated bullet. Now, another disadvantage of the plated bullet is since that plating is so thin, you have to apply a very light crimp. If you've seen my video on crimping handgun and rifle cartridges or bullets, you know about this Cannelure that's on some bullets, typically full metal jacket bullets, or in the case of a lead bullet, there'll be a crimp groove in the bullet. Now, with a plated bullet, they really can't put a Cannelure in there, and because the plating is so thin, so typically you won't have a Cannelure, and you really can't do a roll crimp. people do, but it has to be such a light roll crimp that it so it doesn't cut through that plating. So they all have their advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of a lead bullet is it's very inexpensive. The disadvantage is it's very dirty. Plated bullets are less expensive. Disadvantage is that they can only be fired at lower velocities. And then you've got the jacketed bullet, which are a little more expensive, but they can be fired at much higher velocities. They can be roll crimped if they've got a Cannelure on them. Here's one with a Cannelure. So that's kind of the three different kinds of composition that you'll find. Now, you'll also find in the jacketed bullet family are what's known as premium bullets. Now, premium bullets, excuse me, have different mechanisms inside the jacket to try to bond the lead core to the jacket itself. Sometimes it's a belt kind of on the inside of the jacket, that the lead can grab onto, and it keeps the bullet together a little better. For instance, if a hunting bullet, for example, it'll keep that bullet together a little better when it impacts an animal, and it'll stay together until it penetrates a little further before it starts expanding, so that you get that expansion into the vital organs of the animal and kill the animal. Otherwise, you may not get that kind of expansion. Now, full metal jacket bullets are not to be used for hunting. In fact, I'm pretty sure they're illegal in most places. At least a bullet like this, where the nose and everything is covered entirely in copper. Now, one of the things that they started doing in order to improve the expansion capabilities of a jacketed bullet is they started making hollow points and kind of open tip bullets. Even with the rifle bullets. I don't know if you can see that, if it's in focus or not, but this is a hollow point 308. Now what they did with this is they kind of, instead of having the cup sitting like this with the lead, coming into the back, is they reversed it. Now they have the back end of the bullet fully jacketed, but the front end is opened up, and they put the lead in that way. So they kind of reverse it, instead of having the jacket, from the nose down, jacketed. They have it from the base of the bullet up, and so it's a little bit of a different way to do it. But they did that in order to be able to increase improve on the expansion capabilities of the bullet, so that they could be used for hunting. And like I said, full metal jacket bullet like this should not be used for hunting. Now in the rifle world, of course, they have the same kind of thing. They have what's known as a soft tip bullet. It can either be round or they can be pointed. Here's a round nose soft tip, and here's a pointed or spitzer is I guess the correct term for it, or people call it a spire point. Basically, spitzer means pointy in German. But essentially it's the same kind of thing, where as a hollow point pistol bullet, where you've got the base of the bullet covered by jacketed material, and then the front of the bullet is open, and a lot of times they'll have this lead soft area here that is on the tip, and these kind of bullets would expand better for hunting purposes. Now, you'll see a lot of manufacturers create what's called a hard point. I think the original hard points were created back in the 30s or 40s, and it actually was a bronze tip that they had on the end here. Nowadays, what they're doing is putting a hard plastic tip on the end of the bullet, and what that does is it gives the bullet better capability to cut through the air. And we're going to talk quite a bit about that in a little bit. So, just wanted to kind of go over the composition of bullets a little bit before we start talking about how to select them, and so that you understand some of the different types of bullets that are out there. Have you ever seen the commercial? I forget who it's for, Cars.com or Carfax or somebody, where a woman is wanting to buy a car, a used car. And at first she's presented with 1,000 different choices. And she can narrow that down. For instance, she says, well, I want something that's 2010 or later. And that narrows the number of cars that she's presented with quite a bit. She says, I want only cars that have had one owner. And that narrows it even further down. And cars that have never been in an accident, that narrows it down. Well, you can do the same thing with bullet selection. The difference being, unlike buying a car where you basically can select whatever car you want based on what you want, bullet selection is governed by what's appropriate. So you can't just go out and buy any old bullet you want and use that. You have to follow certain guidelines. But you can narrow your choices down quite a bit. The steps we're about to go through are the steps that I go through. Your mileage may vary. You may want to do something, do it a little bit differently, but this is how I do it. Now, obviously, the first choice is the caliber. You really don't have a lot of choice with that. You've got to look at your firearm and determine what caliber bullet your firearm is capable of shooting. Of course, the easiest way to do that is to get your reloading manuals out, and for any particular caliber, it'll give you in big old bold letters exactly what diameter the bullet is. Here for 358 Norma Magnums, 358 thousandths of an inch. 3040 Craig is 308 thousandths of an inch. So that's the first step. And it's very easy to find out. You probably already know what caliber bullet your rifle fires, but it's very easy to find out. Just check your reloading manual. It'll tell you exactly what bullet diameter is. Now you can't really go by the caliber name to get the bullet diameter. For example, with 45 automatic, the bullet diameter is actually 451 thousandths. If it's a cast bullet, it's typically 452 thousandths. 223 Remington, the bullet diameter is not 223, it's 224. And 224 bullet can be used in anything from 22 Hornet to 5.56 NATO, and just a bunch of different calibers use the 224 thousandths diameter bullet. So go to your reloading manual. If you're not sure, go to the reloading manual, look up the cartridge that your rifle is chambered for, and it'll tell you in big old bold letters exactly what diameter bullet you're looking for. Now, that's the easy part, and that'll eliminate 80 or 90% of the bullets out there that are available, because there are thousands of bullets available out there. But that's only the start. That's only the first step. Don't stop there. A lot of, like that guy at the gun show, it seemed like he stopped at the diameter and didn't take anything else into consideration. Maybe he did, but it appeared that he did not. The next step in determining what bullet to select, again, involves your firearm. You want to take a look at the twist rate of the rifling in your barrel. Now, the twist is given in a ratio of how many revolutions that the bullet makes in a certain number of inches. For instance, a 1 in 10 twist means that the bullet will rotate a full 360 degrees in 10 inches of barrel. If it's 1 in 7 twist, that means it'll rotate 360 degrees in 7 inches of barrel. And the lower the twist rate, the faster the rotation of the bullet. Typically a 1 in 7 twist rate is considered a faster twist rate than, say, a 1 in 10 twist rate. A 1 in 14 twist rate is even slower. In other words, the bullet is spinning slower than with a 1 in 14 inch twist than it is in a 1 in 7 twist. In fact, it's twice as slow. 1 in 7 twist is 1 turn in 7 inches. A 1 in 14 twist in that same 7 inches, it would only turn half a turn. The lower the twist rate, the faster the bullet is spinning. Now, with bullets, the heavier a bullet is, the faster it needs to be spinning in order to stabilize. Now, the 55 grain bullet, for example, will stabilize in a lot of different twist rates, anywhere from 1 in 8 to 1 in 14. So it's not like this size bullet or this weight bullet has to be shot with a certain twist rate. You really are looking more for the higher weight bullets needing a faster twist rate. For example, in an AR-15, if you've got an AR-15 that has, say, a 1 in 9 twist rate or a 1 in 10, it's probably not going to stabilize that heavier bullet. And what do I mean by stabilize? Well, as the bullet flies through the air, you don't want it to yaw left or right or up and down. You want it to have a fast enough spin on it so that the bullet will fly straight and true. There's no yaw involved. Well, if you have say a 70 grain bullet in an AR-15 with a 1 in 10 inch twist, it's just not going to spin that bullet fast enough to keep that bullet straight and narrow. It's going to yaw a little bit. It's just not spinning fast enough to stabilize. You would need something like a 1 in 7 twist or even a 1 in 8 twist to get a 70 grain bullet to stabilize. Now, over time, you kind of learn what bullets work and what don't in your particular firearm. So it's you don't really need a mathematical formula. There is one, and I'll show you that in a minute, to figure out what twist rate you need, or based on your twist rate, what size bullet you should use, that sort of thing. Just know that the heavier the bullet, the possibility exists that you need a faster twist rate in order to stabilize that bullet. With a lighter weight bullet, say a 55 grain 223 Remington bullet, a fast twist rate will cause the same stabilization problem. It'll tend to yaw and up and down, left and right as it flies through the air. So one time people would say, that a 55 grain bullet would fly apart or fall apart, if you shot it with a 1 in 7 twist. And that's kind of been debunked. There's still a debate about it, and depending on which end of the spectrum you fall. But the problem with shooting a lightweight bullet like a 55 grain bullet with a 1 in 7 twist isn't necessarily that the bullet's going to fly apart. But it's still going to have stabilization problems. It's going to be spinning too fast for the weight of the bullet to keep it straight and true as it's flying through the air. So, some people will tell you it'll fly apart, other people won't, but regardless of whether the bullet will fly apart or not, and what you believe in along those lines, a 1 in 7 twist shooting a 55 grain bullet will cause that bullet to not stabilize properly, and it'll tend to yaw up, down, left, and right. Another interesting tidbit of information I'll give you is most rifles have a right-hand twist, and there's a reason for that. Right-hand twist means that as the bullet is traveling down the barrel, it'll be spinning or turning through the rifling in a clockwise direction as you're looking at it, if you're looking downrange. And you've all heard the law of physics, or whatever it is, that it says for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, it's true of the barrel of your rifle as well. The rifling in the barrel is turning that bullet to the right or clockwise, and what that's doing is applying an equal and opposite reaction to the barrel. So the barrel will want to twist to the left. Um, Now, if you are looking at it, where, let's say this is my barrel here, my pen, with the muzzle here and the chamber here, and I'm looking down range, the bullet is turning to the right, and the barrel is wanting to then to twist to the left or counterclockwise. Well, now let's reverse that to where now I'm looking at the muzzle of the barrel, and the chamber is down here, and the bullet is turning, what is now counterclockwise, since we're looking at it from the opposite direction. And what that's going to want to do is turn the barrel to the right or clockwise. Well, most rifles have a screw-in barrel. The barrel screws into the receiver of the rifle. So if the bullet has a right-hand twist and it's turning, clockwise, and if we're looking at it from the muzzle, and the barrel is wanting to twist then clockwise to the right, that's basically screwing the barrel into the frame, so it doesn't come loose. Now imagine if the bullet then had a left-hand twist. If the bullet is turning clockwise as you're looking at it from the muzzle end, that's going to want to cause the barrel to turn to the left or counterclockwise. And you all know the righty-tighty, lefty-loosey axiom, where if the barrel is turning to the left, you're basically unscrewing the barrel. Well, it is theoretically, I've never heard of it happening, but of course most rifles have a right-hand twist, but it's theoretically possible that over time that force it's causing the barrel to want to turn to the left could loosen that up from your receiver, so it would actually kind of start to unscrew your barrel. So on rifles that have a barrel that screws in to the receiver, like for instance an AR-15, I think an AR-15, I have to look, but it'll have a right-hand twist, so that as the bullet travels down the rifling of the barrel is turning this way, and it's basically just trying to screw it in, and it won't be loosening it up. Interesting tidbit, has nothing to do with bullet selection, but there you have it. Now, how do you determine what the twist rate of your rifle is? Well, for rifles, it's right there on the barrel. Just take a look at your barrel. This is my Remington 700. It tells me it's tactical rifling 1 in 10 inch twist. I don't know exactly what tactical rifling means, but the important information here is it's a 1 in 10 inch twist. Pistols typically don't have it on the barrel, but 1 in 16 is common. Now here's my AR. It tells me quite a bit more information. It tells me what the barrel is made of, what it's chambered for, what kind of rifling it has. But the important information here is that it has a 1 in 8 inch twist. Now, I bought this particular rifle because of that twist rate. It's a good compromise between the faster 1 in 7 inch twist and the slower 1 in 9 or 1 in 10 inch twist. So this rifle is good for both the heavier bullets and like the 70 or 75 grain, and also for the lighter 55 grain bullets. So it's the 1 in 8 inch twist on AR is a good twist. Now what do you do with this information? Well, the first place to check is your reloading manual. If the manufacturer of the bullet has a particular recommendation, then you should go by that. For example, in this particular one, it tells you that the GMX 70 grain bullet will not stabilize in 1 in 8 inch twist or higher, and that they actually tested this with a 1 in 7 inch twist. So the first place you should look is your reloading manual, and if the manufacturer has a particular recommendation, then you should definitely go by that. Now, if there's no particular recommendation and you're still not sure what size bullet to use, there is a formula, and here's an excerpt from the Wikipedia page on the Miller twist rule and the formulas you can apply. Now, explaining this formula goes way beyond the scope of this particular video, and it would take way too long. But you can go, if you're interested in it, you can go to Wikipedia, do a search on Miller twist rule, M-I-L-L-E-R, twist rule, and you can look at this page and look at the mathematics involved. Now, if you're like me and you do not have a PhD in mathematics, there's a couple of stability calculators out there. One from JBM Ballistics here. Also, Burger Bullets has a nice one. That both of them take the muzzle velocity and temperature and altitude corrections into account. They both use the Miller twist rule, which is typically regarded as the most accurate or the best one to use. There's a few other formulas, like Greenhill has one, but the Miller twist rule seems to be the industry favorite these days. Now, I prefer the Burger Bullet stability calculator for a couple of reasons. One, they use altitude for their calculations, and the JBM Ballistics one uses pressure. Now, I'm able to determine what the altitude where I'll be shooting is a lot easier than I can the barometric pressure, since that changes with the weather. So, but the altitude remains constant. The Burger Bullet calculator also takes the ballistic coefficient so that it can tell you what kind of degradation your ballistic coefficient has. Now, I'll be talking more about the ballistic coefficient here in a little bit. So if you're not sure exactly what that is, don't worry, we'll explain that to you. Now, the ballistic coefficient is not used in the Miller twist rule in the calculation to determine your stability factor. But the Burger Bullet site takes that so that they can tell you if you're achieving the maximum ballistic coefficient or if it's being degraded by the twist and weight and size of your bullet. So it's not used in the calculation, but I like it because it will tell you the degradation, whereas the JBM calculator doesn't have the ballistic coefficient in there. Okay. Now, let's use the Burger Bullet calculator here. I'll scroll up a little so you can see the chart. The ballistic coefficient, or I'm sorry, the stability factor is going to be represented by a number, anywhere from 0 to infinity, really, but typically they're between 0 and 4, somewhere in that neighborhood. Now, I've taken a bullet that I have in my shop here. It's got a ballistic coefficient of 255 or 0.255. It's a 224 caliber. It weighs 55 grains. It's 0.735 inches long. I put a muzzle velocity of 2400 in. My AR has a twist of 1 1/8 inches, so I put that in. And the temperature of 59 and the altitude of 0, that's the standard temperature at sea level that the military standards document uses for doing things like this and other things. So I'm going to leave that at 59 and 0. And when you hit the calculate stability, I get a stability factor of 2.83. Now, the little chart down here at the bottom tells you that anything less than 1, the bullet will not stabilize. If it's between 1 and 1.5, it's marginally stable, but you're going to have some accuracy loss because the bullet, the ballistic coefficient is going to be degraded some. And anything over 1.5 means you've got a stable bullet, or the bullet will stabilize in the air. Now, if we take these values here, now the weight and length and twist rate are the three parameters that make the biggest difference in the stability factor. For example, if I bump this up to a 70 grain bullet, you'll see that goes way up to 3.6 stability factor. But my 70 grain bullet here is 0.987 inches long. If I calculate the stability there, you'll see it drops all the way down to 1.55. Still stable, but you can see that the length of the bullet has a major impact on the stability that it can achieve in the air with a particular twist and muzzle velocity. Now, for example, let's bump that up to a 1 in 9 twist and calculate that. Well, now we're down into marginal stability. And it tells me here my ballistic coefficient originally was 255. The adjusted ballistic coefficient for this 1 in 9 inch twist is 0.234. So I'm getting an 8% degradation in my ballistic coefficient. Again, don't worry about ballistic coefficient yet. I'll explain that here shortly. And the minimum twist recommended for this particular bullet at that velocity and temperature and everything is 1 in 8 inches. Okay. Well, if we bump that up to 1 in 10 inches, for example, now we've got an unstable bullet. It's below 1. So this particular bullet, 70 grain bullet, 0.987 inches long at 2,400 feet per second, will not stabilize in a barrel with a 1 in 10 twist. Okay. If I try to bump up the muzzle velocity to stabilize it, say we'll bump that up to 2,700, has a very little effect. Muzzle velocity will give you a little bit better stability, but it doesn't have that big an effect on the overall stability of the bullet. The weight and length are the two things that affect the stability factor the most. If I go back to that 7.735 inch bullet, you'll see that it jumps way up. It's much smaller or much shorter bullet, but it's actually 0.987, and that bumps it way down to 1. So let's go back to 1 in 8 twist, get everything the way it's supposed to be. So my rifle with a 1 in 8 inch twist with a muzzle velocity, say, of 2,500, is able to stabilize a 70 grain bullet that's 0.987, almost an inch long. Okay. The ballistic coefficient, like I said, it's not used in the calculation, so even if this had a ballistic coefficient of, say, 430, you'll see it has absolutely no effect on the stability factor. The only reason that ballistic coefficient is there is so that it can tell you whether or not you're achieving the max BC or if you're getting some degradation. Okay. Now, so the weight and length of the bullet and the twist rate have the biggest impact on the stability factor. Now, if I know I'm going to be shooting at 75 degrees down here in Florida, the range I shoot at is at 80 feet altitude, you'll see that it has a small effect on the stability factor, but it's not major. So if you leave these at 59 and 0, you'll get a good idea of what the stability factor is. If I know I'm in Ohio in the summertime, southwestern Ohio is about 800 feet, you'll see that has, again, a small effect on the stability factor. It jumps up to 1.66. The higher up you go, the better the stability factor, I guess, because the less dense the air is, that sort of thing. But this is a handy little tool here for determining if your particular rifle, with whatever twist rate your rifle has, is able to stabilize a bullet of a particular weight and length. The longer the bullet is, the faster it has to spin in order to stabilize. Same thing with the weight. The more it weighs, the faster it has to spin in order to stabilize. Okay. So burgerbullets.com, they've got a twist rate calculator. You can also go check out the one at jbmballistics.com. Depending on whether you prefer to use pressure or altitude, take a look at both and see what you like. They both come up with the same answer, so it's not like one's going to be better than the other or more precise or anything. I found that they both come up with the same answer for the same parameters. But I like the Burger Bullet one because I know what my altitude is at all times, and the pressure, the barometric pressure, is affected by the weather, whether it's about to rain or you're have a tornado coming or something like that. But again, the temperature and the pressure or altitude has a much smaller effect on the stability factor. So far, just by looking at our firearm, we've determined the diameter of the bullet we need, and we've learned how to determine the weight and length of the bullet that we're looking for based on the stability factor. Now, the firearm tells us more about the kind of bullet that we're looking for. We can tell what general shape we want in a bullet. For example, my Winchester 94 lever action rifles, they have a tubular magazine. They shoot 30-30 rounds. And in a tubular magazine, you've got the cartridges in a tube, kind of like nose to butt kind of like thing, like this. Now, if you see where the nose of this bullet is hitting the cartridge in front of it, the primer's right there. Now, if I were to use a spire point or a Spitzer bullet, a pointy bullet, the point of that bullet can become a firing pin. When I fire the round that's in the chamber, the bullets or the cartridges in the tubular magazine are going to be, taking a hit a little bit from the recoil. And what can happen is, if I have a pointy bullet like this, or a spire point or Spitzer bullet, the point of that bullet becomes a firing pin and can possibly ignite the primer and set that cartridge off. And then what I have is an out of battery detonation in the tubular magazine of my rifle, and that is never a good thing. So what I want to do with cartridges that have a tubular magazine is I want to have kind of a flat point on them, or at least a soft point. These are kind of both. They're kind of a round nose, flat point bullet, and they've got a lead soft point on them. So chances of this cartridge setting off the primer in the cartridge in front of it is very low. Whereas if I were using Spitzers like this, I may have a problem. I also have a Henry Golden Boy lever action that I use for cowboy action shooting. It shoots a 45 long Colt. So when I'm loading for that, I typically use a lead bullet in it, and I'll use a flat point like this here, so that there's no possibility of that setting off the primer in the cartridge in front of it in the tube there, because it also has a tubular magazine. So we can get a little idea of the shape of the bullet that we're looking for based on the kind of magazine we have. If it's a stackable magazine, like with an AR-15, this is a 223 Remington round, they stack on top of each other, and you don't have that consideration. So you can use a Spitzer or a spire point bullet with a hard point on it, that because they're not arranged like this, they're arranged on top of each other. So this is a better choice for an AR-15 for a bullet. Now, and of course, in a pistol, with like a revolver, the choice of shape is pretty much anything you want, because there's no nose to butt kind of configuration with that. Now, there's another thing that looking at the firearm can tell us. If we have a semi-automatic firearm, like an AR-15 or a 45 ACP, something like that, we will probably want to put a roll crimp on our bullet. So we'll want to select a bullet that has a Cannelure, that little indented ring around the circumference of the bullet, that will allow us to put a roll crimp on the bullet. With a semi-automatic rifle like an AR-15 or a 45, 1911, 45, that kind of thing. The bullet kind of takes a beating when the next uh, cartridge is stripped off the top of the magazine and hits that loading ramp and slides up the loading ramp into the chamber. That bullet can be compressed down into the case, and if you don't have a good crimp on it, then it's possible for that bullet to be pushed back down into the case. You can check out my video on crimping handgun and rifle cartridges for more information about the Cannelure and roll crimping and taper crimping, things like that. But for a semi-automatic, you probably want to put a roll crimp on your bullet. So you want to select a bullet that has a Cannelure as opposed to a bullet that has just a flat side like that, where you would use a taper crimp. Also, if you do have a tubular magazine, that bullet is taking pressure to be pushed back down into the case in a couple of ways. One, you've got the spring at the end of the tube there that's putting a little pressure on the bullets. So as you work the lever, the bullets will move back into position. So you've got that spring there that's putting tension on the bullet, trying to push it back into the case. You also then have the recoil when the bullet that's up in the chamber fires. These guys here take a little bit of they kind of jerk back and forth a little bit, and the pressure can be increased suddenly on the bullet in the cartridge behind and get pushed back down in there. So with a tubular magazine, you probably want to select a bullet that has a Cannelure so that you can apply a roll crimp and get a little better grip on the bullet with the mouth of the case. Okay, same thing with a semi-automatic. If you're using a bolt-action rifle, for example, that either has an internal stackable magazine or a removable stackable magazine, then you can use a bullet that does not have a Cannelure on it. You can just apply a taper crimp. So a lot of the match grade bullets you'll find out there do not have a Cannelure because they kind of expect that you're shooting these out of a bolt-action rifle. Not all of them. I mean, there's obviously rifle bullets with Cannelures on them, but so if you're shooting a bolt action, you don't necessarily have to have a Cannelure. You can still roll crimp them, even if they're in a bolt action rifle. But if you've got a tubular magazine or you've got a semi-automatic, you probably want to put a roll crimp on it. So, just by taking a critical look at the firearm, we can determine the diameter, the length, the weight, the shape, and whether or not it has a Cannelure. The rifle or the firearm that we're using can tell us a lot about what kind of bullet we want to select for loading around for it. Let's talk a little bit about sectional density. What is sectional density? Basically, it allows you to determine the penetration characteristics of a projectile. Now, take for an example, over here on the left we have a piece of plywood, and we're looking at it end on here, so it looks kind of thin, but it's a sheet of plywood. Over here on the right we have a wooden dowel rod. It's a 1/2 inch in diameter, weighs 1/4 pound. Now, if I were to hurl that wooden dowel rod at the plywood like a spear, it would hit the plywood and stop dead and drop to the ground. But now let's assume I have a piece of steel rebar. Same 1/2 inch diameter, but the steel rebar weighs 7 pounds. Now, if I were to hurl that at the plywood, it has enough weight behind it to blast through that plywood and penetrate it. Okay. As a third example, let's say we have an aluminum cylinder. Now, the aluminum cylinder is 5 inches in diameter, and since it's made of aluminum, it still only weighs 7 pounds, the same as the rebar. Now, if I were to take that aluminum cylinder somehow and throw it like a spear, it would hit the plywood and stop dead, just like the wooden dowel rod. It might leave a dent, but won't penetrate. Now, we can calculate the sectional density or the penetration characteristics of a projectile with the following formula. Weight in pounds divided by the diameter squared. So let's take the case of our wooden dowel. Our wooden dowel is a quarter pound, so it's 0.25, and it's a half inch in diameter. So at the bottom of the formula I have 0.5 inches times 0.5 inches. And that comes out to 0.25 divided by 0.25. So the sectional density of our wooden dowel is 1. Now, let's apply that same formula to our steel rebar. Steel rebar is 7 pounds. It's also a half inch in diameter, so we have a 0.5 inch times 0.5 inch on the bottom there. And that comes out to 7 divided by 0.25, and that gives us a sectional density of 28, much higher than the wooden dowel rod. And again, let's apply that same formula to our aluminum cylinder. The aluminum cylinder is also 7 pounds, but the diameter is 5 inches. So we have 5 inches times 5 inches on the bottom. That comes out to 7 divided by 25. So our aluminum cylinder has a sectional density of 0.28, very low, even smaller than our wooden dowel rod. Now, I don't think any of us needed a mathematical formula to determine that the steel rebar had the best shot of penetrating through that piece of plywood. Here we have our 3 projectiles here. The steel rebar with a very high sectional density of 28, while our wooden dowel has a sectional density of 1, and the SD for aluminum cylinder is 0.28. So, as you can see, the higher the sectional density of a projectile, the better the penetration characteristics of that projectile. Now, as I mentioned, we don't need a mathematical formula to determine that the steel rebar would go through that plywood and the wooden dowel would not. But now, let's think about it in terms of bullets. Well, bullets are tiny little objects, and relatively tiny compared to our aluminum cylinder and steel rebar. They're less than half an inch in diameter. The difference in weight from bullet to bullet is just a few thousandths of a pound. So you can't really look at a bullet and determine, gee, will that penetrate the plywood or a particular material or not. So what we have to do is calculate the sectional density for bullets. Now we have to modify our formula a little bit. That uppercase W there at the top, that represents the weight in pounds. Well, we measure bullets in grains, not in pounds. The bottom, the capital D there, is the diameter in inches, and that's fine because we also measure our bullets in inches, or the diameter of our bullets in inches. So we have to modify this formula a little bit. And the first thing we need to do, it's simple enough to convert the weight in pounds to grains. Since there's exactly 7,000 grains in a pound, we simply multiply the weight times 7,000. Now, I freely admit that I slept through most of high school algebra class, but the one thing I did retain from Mrs. Yunkin is that anything I do at the top of the formula, I also have to do to the bottom of the formula. So we have to multiply our diameter squared by 7,000 as well. And we can simplify that by changing the formula to look like this. Here I have a lowercase w that represents the weight in grains instead of pounds. And on the bottom then, the formula becomes 7,000 times the diameter in inches squared. Now, let's apply that to a couple of popular bullet sizes. At the top here, we have a 223 Remington bullet. It's 55 grains, 0.224 inches in diameter. And using our formula there, we find that the sectional density for this particular bullet is 0.157. Now on the bottom here, we have a 150 grain 308 bullet. And it has a sectional density of 0.226 once we apply this formula. Now I don't think that's surprising to anybody that a 150 grain 308 bullet is going to have better penetration capabilities than a 55 grain 223. Well, let's take a look at a couple of handgun bullets here. Here we have at the top, we have a 180 grain 40 caliber bullet. And it has a sectional density of 0.161 once we apply our formula here. Now on the bottom we have a 230 grain 45 caliber bullet. Now you would expect that, bigger bullet, heavier, to have better penetration capabilities. But its sectional density is only 0.162. And what this should illustrate to you is that the larger the diameter of a projectile, the more weight it has to have behind it in order to achieve the same penetration capabilities or the same sectional density as a smaller, lighter bullet. Okay, so and this is one of the reasons why the 40 cal Smith & Wesson was so popular and was so touted when it first came out, that we can have the same penetration capabilities while at the same time reducing recoil. We can fit more rounds in a magazine, etc., than we can with the 45. So this is one of the reasons why the 40 caliber Smith & Wesson was so popular, and the 10 millimeter as well. We achieve the same penetration with a lighter, smaller bullet. Now, what does all this mean in terms of bullet selection? And why did I just spend the last 5 minutes of your life with a math lesson? Well, for us target shooters, sectional density doesn't really come into play in terms of penetration capabilities. For example, an air gun shooting a BB will go through paper. A BB is 177 thousandths of an inch in diameter and weighs about 5.4 grains. It has a sectional density of 0.022, very small, but it'll still go through paper. So for us target shooters, sectional density isn't as important, although it does come into play a little bit in my next segment here on ballistic coefficients. But for the hunter, sectional density is an important aspect in selecting a bullet. Now, they need to decide what kind of bullet to use for a particular application. For example, a bullet with a sectional density of around 180, a little higher, a little lower, is good for varmint hunting, squirrel and gopher, that sort of thing. For small game like deer, goats, and yes, people, sectional density of 230 or thereabouts is better. When you get up to 280 sectional density, now we're talking about medium game like elk, antelope, or even moose. And when we get up over 300, well, now we're talking about large game like bear or even elephant. So a hunter, if he's going out for a particular type of game, he's going to select a cartridge or reload bullets that have the appropriate sectional density for the kind of game that he's going after. So that's generally how hunters use sectional density. Target shooters, not so much. Now, don't confuse sectional density with stopping power. Sectional density can determine the penetration characteristics of a bullet, but in terms of stopping power, you were talking about getting into the bullet's shape and the bullet composition. For example, with varmint hunting, you would want a bullet that expands very rapidly because you don't want the bullet to go all the way through the animal without expanding at all. So you want something that's going to hit and start expanding right away. Whereas with, say, medium game, elk or antelope, you want the bullet to penetrate the skin, the fur, the muscle and bone, and hold together before it really starts expanding. So the wound channel through the vital organs is larger. But if it breaks apart as soon as it hits the fur, the skin of the animal, it may not, the penetration, you may not get the kind of penetration you need in order to get a clean kill. And you don't want to wound the animal. That's just cruel. And hunters are very conscientious about getting a clean kill without uh, the animal suffering, so to speak. Um, Now, in the small game group there, where I've included people, uh, 230 sectional density is a little high, but here we're talking, I think, more about military or police applications, where you're dealing with people who are wearing heavy combat gear. You got backpacks and heavy mesh straps holding their gear on, and combat armor and things like that. So for a defensive round, a sectional density of 0.230 is a little high. But for military and police applications, I think that's more appropriate, maybe even bigger if you're dealing with combat armor. Now here's a list of bullets in my Reloaders Workshop program. Now this is by no means a complete database. The database, for example, for handguns that I have here only includes 9mm 40 cal and 45 caliber bullets. So there are smaller bullets, larger bullets, heavier bullets, lighter bullets, and so on. This is by no means a complete list. Now I've sorted the bullets in order of sectional density. That's what the ST column here is, from lowest to highest. Now, you see here in the database that I'm using, my handgun bullets range anywhere from a sectional density of 0.130 to 0.179. Now, you may be wondering, in the previous segment we talked about 230 sectional or 0.230 sectional density is the small game range, which included people. Well, this is actually a good thing that the sectional density of handgun bullets is fairly low, because you're typically using a handgun in a defensive posture, either in the home or in public, where overpenetration can be a problem. You don't want a bullet that's going to be going through your assailant and through the wall and into the home or apartment next door. You also don't want it going through your assailant and taking out your 72-inch flat screen. So the fact that handgun bullets have such a low sectional density is actually a good thing. It'll penetrate the person, and depending on the expansion properties of the bullet you're using, it'll either kill him or wound him. I hate to be callous about it, but that's kind of where it is. So at any rate, the 9mm to 45 caliber bullets that I have in my database range anywhere from 130 to 179 sectional density. Now let's take a look at the rifle bullets. And at the very low end here, I've got a 204 caliber 24 grain bullet that's way down at 0.082 sectional density. And if we go up to the top sectional density here, here's a 308 caliber 225 grain bullet with a sectional density of 0.339. So that would be good for large game. And then we have everything in between. So you have a wide range of choices depending on the use that you're going to be putting that bullet to. Now, one thing I did want to point out here, here's the 55 grain 223 caliber bullet that we looked at earlier with a sectional density of 0.157. Now, that low sectional density tells us a couple of things. One, a lot of people assume that an AR-15, for example, is not a good rifle to use for home defense. They think because it's a rifle that bullet's going to go through your assailant, through the walls, through your TV, and through everything else. But in reality, the 223 Remington with a 55 grain bullet has a fairly low sectional density, which means a fairly low penetration capability. So the AR-15 is actually a good defensive weapon to use in your home. Now, on the downside, the military, when they first came out with the M16, they were having some penetration troubles with with their lightweight 55 grain 5.56 ammunition. I understand now the 5.56 NATO rounds are a little heavier now and have better penetration, but you know, if you're in the military, you can confirm or deny that particular claim. I haven't been in the military for 30 years, so it's I'm not sure where they're at these days. Any rate, so you can see that there's a wide range of sectional densities to choose from, and depending on your application in a hunting world, you can make a decision on which bullet to use based on the sectional density of the particular bullet. Now, as you've seen, the sectional density of a bullet is all about the weight and frontal area or diameter of the bullet. Doesn't take into consideration the shape of the bullet. Well, the ballistic coefficient is all about shape. As soon as the bullet leaves the muzzle of your rifle, it's affected by several environmental factors. For example, drag or air resistance. As soon as it leaves the muzzle, it's going to encounter the air in the atmosphere. And depending on how much drag that bullet has, the faster it's going to lose velocity due to air resistance. It's also going to be affected by gravity. It's going to be pulled down toward the ground. And the slower the bullet is moving, or the faster it loses its velocity, the more effect gravity is going to have on that bullet. It's also affected by wind. Wind is going to cause that bullet to veer off course. Now, most people think of wind as being on the horizontal plane. In other words, it moves it left and right. But wind can also go up and down on the vertical plane. For instance, if you're in a mountainous area, the wind may be, moving up or down depending on whether you're on the windward or leeward side of a peak, that sort of thing. Now, ballistic coefficient is dimensionless. It's not measured in inches or grains or foot-pounds or anything like that. It's simply a value. There's no dimension to it. The values range anywhere from 0 to 1 or even higher. Some bullets out there do have a ballistic coefficient of higher than 1, although you won't see any that have a ballistic coefficient of 0. I mean, a rock has a ballistic coefficient higher than 0. So the bigger the number, the better. The higher your ballistic coefficient, the less drag that bullet has. And that value is calculated by the manufacturer, and it requires some specialized equipment, ranging anywhere from multiple chronographs to Doppler radar and that sort of thing. Now, just a note about the calculations or the ballistic coefficients that are provided by the manufacturer. Each manufacturer calculates their ballistic coefficient a little differently. I mean, there's some universal constants that they all use, but they're calculated slightly differently. So it's kind of hard to compare a bullet A from manufacturer ABC with bullet B from manufacturer XYZ, because those two manufacturers may have calculated that ballistic coefficient differently. So you can use it as a comparison to a degree, but it's a better comparison among bullets from the same manufacturer than it is from bullets from different manufacturers. And also, if you've ever gone shopping for a flat screen TV, for example, one of the specifications you look at when you're looking for a flat screen is the contrast ratio. And you look at television A, and it has a contrast ratio of 1 to 10,000. And you look at television B from a different manufacturer, and it has a contrast ratio of 1 to 10 million. Well, does that mean that television B is 1,000 times better than television A? No. They're calculated a little differently, and some manufacturers will do a calculation that uh, exaggerates their contrast ratio of their televisions a little bit so that their TV looks better. Well, bullet manufacturers do the same thing. They tend to exaggerate their ballistic coefficients a little bit. So if you uh, create a trajectory or a bullet drop chart, for example, and the bullet drop chart says at 300 yards the bullet will drop 20 inches based on the ballistic coefficient and the muzzle velocity and so on. But you get out to the range and it actually drops 30 inches. Well, that could be your bullet drop calculation was done wrong, but it's also very likely that the manufacturer exaggerated their ballistic coefficient a little bit. So that's kind of common, and that's, you know, some manufacturers do it more so than others because they know that when reloaders are out there shopping for bullets, they're looking at that ballistic coefficient and determining which bullet to buy. So they want their bullet to look better. Now, mathematically, the ballistic coefficient is the ratio of a bullet's sectional density to its coefficient of form. Now, what's coefficient of form? Well, that's just fancy talk for shape. So if you're talking to someone who raises his pinky while he sips his tea and reminisces about the good old days at Harvard, you can call it coefficient of form. When you're at the range talking to normal folk, you can call it shape. We'll know what you're talking about. Now, the shape affects the ballistic coefficient quite a bit. For example, a Spitzer or pointy bullet will have a higher ballistic coefficient than a round point. A round point bullet will have a higher ballistic coefficient than a flat point bullet. Okay. Now, a higher ballistic coefficient means a few things. The bullet will have a flatter trajectory because it maintains its velocity better. As it travels, it'll be less affected by gravity because it has a higher velocity over a given range. It'll also arrive at the target faster since there's less air resistance, less drag, and it maintains its velocity better. It'll arrive at the target a little quicker, and that can be important to hunters. For example, if they're shooting at a moving target, they don't want to, you know, they give the target less lead time, that sort of thing. And a higher ballistic coefficient means that the bullet will be less affected by wind. Now, let's take a look at a couple of examples. Take a look at it. Here's the Hornady 30-35 interlock round nose bullet. Now, this is a 308 bullet, 150 grain. It has a ballistic coefficient of 0.186. Now, the Hornady 30-31 interlock spire point bullet is identical. It has the same weight, the same body shape and form, but it has a spire point nose or head. And it has a ballistic coefficient of 0.338, quite a bit higher. Now here's the Hornady 30-33 interlock boat tail spire point. It's identical in every way to the 30-31, with the exception that this is a boat tail bullet. And that boat tail will reduce the drag of the bullet, the friction of the air. There's less surface of the body of the bullet to produce friction with the air. And it has a ballistic coefficient of 0.349, a little bit higher. Okay, so as you can see, the shape of the nose or the head of the bullet has a much higher effect on the ballistic coefficient of a bullet than the boat tail. The boat tail gives it a little bit better, but not quite as much as the nose of the bullet. Now let's take a look at some other bullets here. For instance, some 308 caliber 165 grain bullets. Now Hornady doesn't make an interlock round nose bullet at 165 grains, but they do make a 165 grain interlock spire point. It's identical in every way to the 30-31 bullet, with the exception that it's 165 grains. And that bullet has a ballistic coefficient of 0.387, quite a bit higher even than the 30-33 with the boat tail. They also make the 3045 interlock boat tail spire point bullet. This is identical in every way to the 3033 bullet, with the exception, of course, that it's 165 grains. And you can see it has a ballistic coefficient of 0.435. So, in addition to the nose, the shape of the nose of a bullet being a major factor in the ballistic coefficient calculation, the weight of the bullet also has a major effect on the ballistic coefficient. The bullets on the left here have a sectional density of 0.226, while the bullets on the right have a sectional density of 0.248. So given two identical bullets, the bullet with the superior sectional density will have a higher ballistic coefficient. It'll maintain its velocity better. It'll have a flatter trajectory. It'll be less affected by wind, that sort of thing. So given the two bullets, 150 grain versus 165 grain, if you're looking for a flatter trajectory, you would go with the heavier bullet. Now that's assuming that, based on the twist rate of your rifle and the sectional density being correct for the application you're going to put that bullet to. Those are other factors that would affect your choice in bullets, but these would be the factors. Given all things equal, the bullet with the higher ballistic coefficient may be the way to go. Now, don't confuse a higher ballistic coefficient with a bullet being better than one with a lower ballistic coefficient. For example, the two bullets on the bottom there, the Hornady 3033 and the 3045. Even though the 3033 bullet has a lower ballistic coefficient, you can load that bullet to a higher velocity than you can with the 3035 or the 3045. So, given that, you may achieve a better trajectory or a flatter trajectory with the 3033, even though it has a lower ballistic coefficient, because you're shooting it at a higher muzzle velocity. So to really compare the two bullets, you can't just look at the ballistic coefficient. You really have to create a ballistics table and look at the drop chart to see what the trajectory of the two bullets are and compare them that way, rather than just going by the ballistic coefficient alone. So it takes a little more research. You can assume that the bullet with the higher ballistic coefficient, has superior drag characteristics and that sort of thing, and will be less affected by wind. But assuming you're shooting them both at the same muzzle velocity, so you really kind of have to look at other things. You can't just look at the ballistic coefficient by itself. So, as you can see, there's a lot more to bullet selection than just the diameter. By looking at your firearm, we determine what diameter we need, but in addition to that, the twist rate will give us a good idea of what length and weight of bullet we should be looking at. Magazine type in our firearm gives us an idea of the shape of the general shape of the bullet that we want. The firearm's action would tell us what type of crimp we want to put on the bullet, and whether or not we need a Cannelure on that bullet. The sectional density gives us an idea of, if we're hunting, it'll give us an idea of what type of game that bullet is good for, or if it's good for personal defense, or good for target shooting. The ballistic coefficient will give us an idea of the trajectory of the bullet, whether it's good for long range or short range shooting, target shooting, or hunting. So there's quite a bit more to selecting a bullet than just the diameter. That's all for this video. I hope you liked it. If so, please click the like button. Maybe even subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and happy reloading.